Welcome, everybody. I'm just getting my self straight.
Getting yourself straight, John. That's going to take longer than the next 30 or 40 minutes.
We're gonna need puns for that.
That was my first effort.
Yeah, well, you're gonna be under a lot of pressure because I uh, I don't know if people know, but I mean, I'm sure they do because I quote you all the time, and I realized we were getting ready for this that I sometimes quote you incorrectly, but because I like to say, that puns are the highest form of wit, which is, essentially what you said,
Yeah.
but not in the words that you said them in. So uh,
You're
that's problematic.
very true to the spirit, if not the letter.
Yeah. So there, I'm
Oh,
posted to social, so
got
I've got that part taken care of.
your viewers here.
I
John,
beg your pardon.
we've got some puns coming in from your viewers. John Haben.
All right. All right. I want to hear them. Put them in the chat. So, James Geary you have written about aphorisms, puns, metaphors, all of my favorite things. And you told me at some point that you began collecting aphorisms when you were a kid and baseball cards.
Right.
So
Probably
tell me about that.
both around the same time. I guess I was maybe around 8 years old. And I grew up in a house where we didn't really have books. There were no books in my house, but there were two things to read: Time magazine and Reader's Digest. And in Reader's Digest, for those mature enough to recall that publication, um, in every issue there was a page of quotable quotes, and we always had copies of Reader's Digest and Time magazine lying around in the bathroom. And I picked up a copy of Reader's Digest, and I came across the quotable quotes section, and I was fascinated by those short, pithy, witty sayings. You know, I went back and read some old Reader's Digest issues from that period, and they were quoting, the people like Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil and those kind of people, but also like writers and artists. It was a really rich read, that one page of quotable quotes. Anyway,
That
I
was a big made a big impression on me too. I remember doing exactly the same thing, although I don't think I've really thought about that lately.
well, those short, pithy, witty sayings are essentially aphorisms, because aphorisms are just short, witty, philosophical sayings. And even though a lot of the meaning of those sayings went over my head, I was 8 or 9 at the time, I knew that there was something special about them, and the way that you could compress so much meaning into so few words. And a lot of aphorisms like that, they turn on puns, they use metaphors. And one of the reasons aphorisms can be so short is because they rely on metaphor. And the metaphor, to use a metaphor, like those little styrofoam dinosaurs you would drop in the bath for your kids, and from pellet size they would expand. That's what a metaphor does. You drop a good metaphor into someone's brain and it starts expanding, and it carries a lot of that storytelling weight, keeping the writing itself short. So I discovered aphorisms in Reader's Digest, and I ended up working for Time magazine. So those two publications had a huge impact on my life.
And you said you had a favorite one when you were a kid. Is that the first one? You remember the first one you collected?
I do remember the first one, and here it is. The difference between a rut and a grave is the depth.
Mm.
And that is from Gerald Burrell, who was Episcopal Archbishop in Chicago. And when I first read that, I had no idea, I didn't have the life experience to gauge the various depths between ruts and graves. But I remember it, and it never left my mind. And that's what I
It's
was.
like it would take on more meaning the older you get, the more you know.
Exactly. So there were periods in my life, challenging professional periods, and where that I would wake up in the morning, and that would be the first thing that would be in my mind. The difference between a rut and a grave is the depth. And I'm here to tell you that's not the greatest thing to have pop into your mind first thing in the morning, but this is the kind of practical function of aphorisms, is that they stick in your mind and they provoke something. And by that phrase recurring in my mind, I knew I had to make a change. And so aphorisms are philosophical, and that's one of the like main criteria for a saying to be an aphorism in my view. But it's a kind of practical philosophy that's meant to be executed. It's not like, being or non-being. It's like I'm in a rut, and if I stay in this rut, it's going to kill me. So how do I get out? And aphorisms are about that kind of those daily existential questions that we face, and how to respond to them.
Is there a word for? I mean, it's not a malapropism or a spoonerism, I don't think. But is there a word for when you get uh, an aphorism backwards? Like for me, what is it? Measure twice, cut once. And I'm a measure once, cut twice person. So which is not a good idea. But is there a word for that?
I think that's called an Archibaldism.
Yeah. Well, the spoonerism's named after Archibald Spooner. So
There you
there
go.
you go. It seems
So
fitting.
you have a saying now named after you.
I have several. You just don't, we can't talk about them on,
Oh, okay.
especially if this is going to Europe, right? So, well, the thing that I love puns. My whole family loves puns. We're pun people, and people always have been telling us that puns are, you know, are not funny, are low forms of humor, that sort of thing. And I'm trying, and you write in your book Wits End, which I love. This is one of many books that we'll talk about later, but I love this book. And I yesterday, when we started doing this, I started looking through my phone. I mean, I was going to type these things out, because I wanted, and I looked at my phone and I had sent texts with photos of your pages like 30 times. And so I was just able to pull the photos from there. But in that, you say that from the beginning, punning has been considered the lowest form of wit, a painful fall from conversational grace. What other form of speech is so widely reviled that we must immediately apologize for using it? Sorry, no pun intended. But puns do not deserve such bitter appellation. Despite its bad reputation, punning is, in fact, among the highest displays of wit. Indeed, puns point to the essence of all true wit, the ability to hold in the mind two different ideas about the same thing at the same time. And the pun's primacy is demonstrated by its strategic use of the oldest sacred texts and stories and myths. Two ideas at the same time. And I do love it. Are you a prolific punster, or are you just analyzing the puns? Should I be afraid to try to make a pun in your presence?
No, no, no. I encourage you to make puns. I love puns, and I'm a prolific punster. But I've learned over the years that not everyone, and this might come as a shock to you, John, not everyone appreciates puns as much as I do. Um, and that realization, and not everyone appreciates my puns as much as I do, which is
I
probably
mean,
the more
the
important.
difference between you and me is that not anyone appreciates my puns. I feel like.
That's
Um,
not.
yeah,
I,
yes. I mean, I've mentioned to you and others before that we often do in my family. We'll send text messages and we'll just launch a series of puns. And for the last few weeks, my kids have been slow to respond to that. And I know they're living lives, which I guess is okay, but they don't have time for that. But then I criticized one on, for not responding, and he responded with this long, what I thought, what I read to be a rant, and I was very worried about him because he never has grammatical errors. This is my oldest son, Drew. He never has grammatical errors. He's very careful about these things, and it was full of it was full of misspellings, and I was like, "Oh no, I'm worried about him." And so I sent some apology, and he was like, "You didn't notice that there were 6 puns in that paragraph," and I was like, "Oh, that's on me." But the question becomes, is the subtlety of the pun an important part of it? So if somebody doesn't get it, I mean, that's really on them, right?
um, it depends. So, first of all, I think punning is the highest form of wit because it's the essence. It's the essence of wit, and wit. We tend to think of wit as being funny, and wit can be funny, but it doesn't have to be funny. Wit is a kind of improvisational intelligence. Like we use expressions like living, I'm at my wit's end, or I'm living by my wits. It's got nothing to do with being a jokester or making puns, but it has to do with having this kind of improvisational intelligence where you can spot a similarity between two very different things and bring them together to create something new. And that's what a pun is. And for me, that is the essence of creativity. Whether you're a writer or an entrepreneur or a scientist, you're noticing these two different things and you're finding a commonality in them that leads to a third thing. And that's the essence of creativity in all its manifestations. So, um, and why I think it's the highest form of wit is because everybody can do it. And everybody, like, you can make the worst pun in the world and people will get it and they'll groan or or they will laugh or they will eject you from the dinner table or whatever it is. But why I think that's the highest form of wit is because if you, like, the person who makes a pun makes a connection between these two things, but the person who understands the pun makes exactly the same connection as the person who invented the pun. So the creative act and the kind of finding that commonality is identical for both people. And so the person who makes the pun or the person who gets the pun is equally as creative as the person who makes the pun because they're both making that same connection. And that's what I think is so wonderful about punning because it's this innate ability to make these kind of really instant connections among really disparate things.
Well, I'm gonna have to remember to tell people that when I'm preparing to be ejected from the table, because I mean this is a shared experience we're having here. You have to take part. I see my wife Alicia has joined us, and so I would like to direct that to you. Also, for you people in the chat, I would love to hear your puns as we go along too, because I love this. Or aphorisms, or Archibald aphorisms, which are aphorisms in reverse. but but I loved in your book that I don't have it with me in front of me. Do you recall? I mean, you there was a pun in from Abraham Lincoln walking down the street. I think that was with William Seward, if I'm not confusing the two. Do you remember what those were?
Um, so Abraham Lincoln, and this is a great example. He loved puns, um, and puns are associated with like not being serious. And Abraham Lincoln was president at one of the most serious times in American history. But even then, he was still making puns. And so puns for me are not, and that's what I was saying earlier about wit. It's not about being funny. If you're under pressure and you're in a really intense situation and you're still able to make those connections and make a pun, it's evidence of your seriousness and your engagement as a thinker. It's not frivolous. So Lincoln, for example, he loved puns, and he was walking down the street with William Seward, who I was the Secretary of State. I can't remember.
Right.
And they came across. They were walking down the street, and Lincoln saw a sign, and it said
Uh, I
"strong,
found it.
strong
Yeah.
tea," and it was just a sign outside.
Say that. I'm sorry. Say it again.
It was just a sign outside a shop. It said "strong tea," and Lincoln said, "Well, tea is strong, but coffee is stronger."
Right. You gotta you gotta love him. Do you have a favorite? I mean, well, I guess that's hard to remember. Uh, um, examples of really good puns. That's
Really,
yeah. Well,
you didn't like that pun?
I did. I mean, Lincoln's Lincoln, but uh,
So there's a guy. I can't. There's
that's a terrible question.
um, another Lincoln pun, and this is also an example of what I was talking about seriousness. He was asked to mute the sentence of someone who is suspend the sentence of someone who is scheduled to be hung the next day. And someone came to his office and gave him the paper to sign. And he said to this person, if I don't suspend the sentence tonight, that person will definitely be suspended tomorrow.
Dark. I like dark.
Dark humor, but like you said earlier, this is a punning and like making jokes. It's a communal activity. It's a very intimate exchange between people, um, because you're actually, you're kind of inside the mind. You're inside each other's minds because you're both following the same line of associations, and that creates it can create a bond. And if one of you doesn't get it, it creates a barrier. But
Right.
when it's working, it's a great way to connect with people.
So when it's not working, is that a good way to determine whether you and this other person should have a friendship or not? Or it's not a test. I have a serious problem in which somebody like Eric, Forsyth, just look in the chat, has a good coffee pun in there. But when somebody says or writes a pun, which I also have a question about, it always makes me. I mean, it just makes me want to pun more. It's like I want to leap into a competition of puns, which I don't win as much as I should, particularly in my family. But is that a natural phenomenon?
Absolutely. So one of the things I do when I do a talk about my especially about the wit book, part of the talk is a pun competition, and it's so much fun. And it's lots of people say, "Oh no, I can't make puns, and I don't want to participate." But once you start doing it, just like you said, John, you get into it, and it gets easier, and you realize we all have this innate ability. So, for example, if we were to have a pun competition with your viewers right now, you could just say something like, "Give me puns on plants," and
But don't leave.
there you go, first one. And I thought this would have stumped you though, John. I thought this would have,
Oh,
yeah.
but I've been branching out with my puns for a long time,
There you go. So
deeply rooted, and yeah.
it
And
is.
I'll do that. I'm great at the one-liner puns, but like my kids, like Eric, there, I mean, will launch into long, elaborate, complex ones, which I deeply am jealous of because when I try that, they seem to be a bit obscure. But the other question I have is is there a difference in written and oral puns?
Ah, so puns are typically well, a difference in composition. How do or the way they're
I mean,
received?
are they the same animal, really? I mean, because sometimes you see things differently than you hear things, and one that works on paper doesn't always work
Yeah.
to the ear.
So, and that's like trying to be funny when you're writing is different when you're trying to be funny when you're talking. And I think so. I think the process of composition is the same. It's that associative thinking. So whether you're writing or talking, you're the associative links are the things. The way your mind works by association is what creates the puns. But when you're writing, you can think it through more. So one of my favorite books, and this I think I've told you this before, is Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, and it's like 600 pages long, and it's built all around puns. Um, and I can see one of the notes in here about a pun in three languages. That's called a macaronic pun, when you make a pun that's involves more than one language. And Joyce knew like a dozen languages, and the whole book is made up of puns. It's written in English, but the puns are macaronic and multilingual, and they're hilarious. but they're also deeply serious because he's making puns not just to laugh, but to like create associations with other works of literature or specific aspects of human history and things like that. So, and I don't think he could have just, as with the genius that he was, I don't think he just reeled that stuff off around the dinner table. I think that was a deliberate process of composition where your style of writing is the pun. The section you just read from Wit's End about why puns are the highest form of wit, there's a whole pun through that whole chapter about the Garden of Eden and the eating the apple. And so you read a sentence that said had the word bitter appellation in it. That's a
Right.
pun on apple. There's all kinds of
Yeah.
apple in that chapter.
Mad props. Yeah.
So,
I
but
mean, and that's and and the thing about all of these things we're talking about, I mean, metaphors, aphorisms, wit. I mean, it's all part of being able to express yourself in ways that are, multi-leveled, and at the same time, it make things easier. I mean, it makes communication both easier and more entertaining.
absolutely. And I think entertainment is a key part of it. And I don't, again, that's not to say puns or metaphors are frivolous, but you know from your work as a journalist that you could be writing something that is really urgent and crucial and important. You still need to engage your audience to get them to read. And that kind of, so it has to be to a certain extent entertaining in the sense that people need to be constantly engaged with their attention and their intelligence. And metaphors and puns, and you can apply them, like I was saying earlier, in the most serious way. But that's a way of doing that. So there's a wonderful, I think one of the best aphorists ever, a Polish dissident named Stanislav Lec, and one of my favorite all-time aphorisms by him is, "No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible." No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible.
Yeah, that's not the least bit relevant, is it? Right.
He was writing during, he was Polish and lived during the Soviet era, so he was writing about the Soviet Union and groupthink. But that aphorism applies to so many situations today, in business, in government, in family life, and it's, if you look at the sentence and think about it, there's not a single word in that sentence that is meant literally. It's 100% metaphor. And if you were to interpret it literally, it's nonsense. It doesn't. It's a non sequitur. It doesn't mean anything. But
Right.
we understand the metaphor, and we're instantly able to apply it. Like you said, that's using irony, which is also a form of wit. That's not relevant. You know,
Right.
immediately connected this non sequitur to what's happening today. And that's the ability that our minds have to make those connections and to make a familiar story surprising and fresh again. So that one sentence, it's got maybe 8, 10, 11 words in it. It's got all the complexity of a novella. Um, and that's how much storytelling you can compress into a single sentence.
When I've always thought that whenever I write, I tend to use, if I find myself using a sort of a well-known adage or something that might be perceived as trite or cliched, I always try to twist that on so it sounds like it, but says something different, so that people know what I'm talking about automatically, but also sense something different, right? And it's all the same sort of uh, philosophy, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's a great writing technique to keep readers engaged. Like Mae West was a great aphorist, and some of her sayings use exactly that technique. She sets you up like she's going in one direction, and then suddenly she reverses. So one of them is, when women go wrong, men go right after them.
Right. So, the what's the difference between an aphorism and an adage, or one of the other very similar things?
Yeah, there are lots of different. names for aphoristic sayings. An adage is closer to a proverb. It's like a saying that's been in the culture for so long that it's kind of the identity of the original author has worn away. And so it becomes an adage. Let sleeping dogs lie. It's kind of an adage, a proverb. But at one point, someone invented that saying, which is really, I find it really interesting to think about. Someone invented let sleeping dogs lie. I don't know how many thousands of years ago or where, but people thought it was so apt and so brilliant that they just kept using it. And the more they used it, the more it entered into the culture, the more remote the identity of the author became. And perversely, it's so popular and it's so brilliant that it becomes a cliche. So adages like that are actually aphorisms that have are become victims of their own success and
Right.
become cliche. And then they enter into the language as a saying, an adage, a proverb that people just kind of thoughtlessly um, repeat when it seems appropriate. So a great challenge is to take that same saying. This is sort of related to what you were saying earlier about twisting a familiar saying. Take an adage or a proverb and see how you can make it fresh.
Right. And also, who do you have to be remembered? I mean, you get Mark Twain, Benjamin Franklin, Aristotle, all these people. When so many things are attributed to them, it's great. But you live in the quest to be remembered for some adage, right, or some aphorism, and and then in there, how do you get to be remembered for one?
John, if I knew that, I mean, I would.
Yeah, so that's the goal, but it's never going to happen. So,
I think
uh,
there's a phrase for that misattribution you're talking about. It's called I forget who came up with it. It wasn't me. It's called Churchillian drift, and
ah,
that's when a saying becomes so popular, but the identity of the author gets obscured, and it's always attributed to Churchill or Gandhi or Lincoln, Harry
right.
Truman, and then that's how it becomes, proverbial, which is a word that we use to describe that kind of thing. I think someone like Stanislav Let's is probably among the greatest aphorists of all time, but hardly anyone in America has ever heard of him. In fact, hardly anyone in the English speaking world has heard of him. In Poland, he's like a folk hero because he was writing at a time when dissidence was not appreciated and was squashed by the censors. He was never censored, and partly because I think his the censors didn't know what he was really talking about because his sayings are so clever. Um, there's a great
Was
one.
that a defense mechanism?
I
I mean,
think
is he doing that intentionally to avoid that scrutiny?
I think he was, but his his peers, his fellow Poles, they loved him and they knew exactly what he was talking about. So um, I think part of it is coming up, and what he's saying. There's nothing new under the sun, which is from the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, um, and for every aphorism, there's dozens of aphorisms about the same thing. There's a great line, and I think this is hopefully, well, I think it may be the best answer I can give to your question. Blaise Pascal, French philosopher, 17th century, um, he was a great aphorist, and he had a great metaphor for what it is to write. And he said, writing is like playing tennis. Everybody's hitting the same ball, but one person places it better. And I was watching a bit of Wimbledon, whenever that was, a couple of weeks ago, and I thought of that Pascal saying, because the artfulness is you haven't invented a new ball, and you're not saying anything that hasn't been said before, but the way that you say it and the way you place that ball and the spin you put on it, just like in tennis, what's what makes someone great. I think that's what makes for a great aphorist.
Right, and the timing. It has to hit at the right time. That's I love that one. Uh, I see Alicia put a Tallulah Bankhead one on there. I'm pure as the driven slush. Love it.
Another great.
We, we love Tallulah Bankhead in this neck of the woods. Some of us. So, well, does the what has the internet age done to um, to these abilities and appreciation for them, and even the way to identify who said what? Because truth truth is such a shifting sort of thing in these days that I worry about the language.
Yeah. Um, I think, yeah, in some ways you might think that social media, the emphasis on brevity, makes this the ideal time. There's some. I hope you can't hear that, but there's some lots of banging going on outside my apartment. Um, the emphasis on brevity makes this like the perfect time to be writing aphorisms, but brevity is brevity has always been appreciated as a form of rhetoric since millennia, long before social media. And so most of what at least most of what I encounter on social media, I would say is the opposite of aphorisms. They're anti-aphorisms. They're meant to like provoke knee-jerk reactions, rage posts, hot takes, those kind of things that are just toxic. All the toxicity and provocation in social media discourse. Aphorisms are also provocative, but they provoke thought. They don't reinforce dogma. So that's why, like, talking about the Soviet Union, or China today, all those sayings coming out of the government, this is the way you should behave. Those are anti-aphorisms because they are meant to create conformity, whereas an aphorism is meant to make you think for yourself, and that is provocative and it can be challenging. And so the way I think of aphorisms in the context of social media is can serve as like psychological circuit breakers. So that cycle of rage post provoking rage post provoking rage post, put an aphorism in there and it kind of short circuits your biases, your assumptions, and hopefully makes you reconsider. But there are tons of people using social media, including the Ukrainian government, aphoristically, as a way to kind of, in the war of words, which is part of any conflict, military conflict included. Uh, you should check out the Ukrainian X account. It's very, very funny, very, very witty, and they use aphorisms to kind of score points against the Russians.
Interesting. So all that was was fascinating to me as a columnist, and because what you say about hot takes really bothers me and all this, and I really want to step back and be more clever and be more, subtle in
Yeah,
ways, which is very difficult in this environment. But I'm interested. You teach op-ed writing at the Kennedy School, right? So what do you are you telling them what you just told us in terms of the power of that speech?
yeah, absolutely. And for like an op-ed, I mean, you know more about op-ed than I do. Um, But an op ed is not a hot take. An op ed is a considered, in fact, I assign your op eds in my class at the Harvard Kennedy School.
Well,
An op ed,
that's what they call the share clip.
um, an op ed is an argument. So you know this, like I said, you know this much better than me. An op ed is an argument, just like an aphorism is an argument. And, but it's an argument in the sense not of like two people shouting at each other, but in the sense of, and that's what the word actually means, is a kind of thinking through of what your point is. And if you think it through and try to put it down, it's only as a result of that process that you discover what you really think. So one of the exercises one of the
Amen to that.
one of the exercises I do in class is I ask students to summarize the argument of their op-ed in one sentence. it can only be one sentence. And everybody moans and cries and like, oh, 800 words is already too short. How can I do it in just one sentence? But if you engage in that exercise and you enforce that kind of discipline, it makes you distill your argument, and that clarifies your thinking. And so it's not only an effective, efficient way to write, but it's sort of calisthenics for your brain to be able to formulate what is a really complicated situation, but formulate it, and it's not dumbing down in any way. I don't mean that, but just being clear and concise and precise so that your audience, and that's the, like, what is an op-ed intended to do? It's intended to persuade an audience, or at least open their minds to something they hadn't considered before. So the discipline of writing short, I think, is really essential to any kind of form of communication. Even if you're writing, an op-ed of 800 words or a book of 80,000 words, being able to be short and powerful and concise is really an essence of good writing.
I couldn't agree more. The best thing that ever happened to me, in terms of that was, I mean, I was a Metro columnist when in the newspaper, which we had essentially 582 words of space right there, which so I made it a point to, I mean, I wrote to 582 words every other day for 20 years, whatever. And when you do that, well, there's some negatives because then you get in a rut, which is, as you pointed out, it's not too different from a grave. But when you have to choose those words so very carefully, then it's not just considering which words you don't use. It's consider, I mean, which words you do use. It's considering which ones you don't, and those. There's so much power in that. And when people tell me 800 words is too short, then I would say 700 is way better. So that's.
Yes.
I mean, and maybe the same thing is true of Substack Lives. So we should probably wrap this thing up. But there's so much I would like to talk about. I mean, just the role of entertainment in those in serious things like that is so important. And when I say entertainment, I don't mean like I don't necessarily mean wild jokes or anything. I mean just something in the language that makes it fun or rhythmic or that makes you think a little bit and maybe you know uh, I think the people who are here think of that as entertainment. Maybe people everywhere don't, but it's really important. But I love before we wrap this up, talk a little bit about your I mean just tell people where they can get your books and talk about your book. Tell us about your books.
Yeah. So thanks for the conversation, John, and thanks for the invitation. Um, so I've written a history of the aphorism. It's called "The World in a Phrase." It's published by the University of Chicago Press. You can order it from your local independent bookstore. And the book on wit that you held up earlier, it's called Wit's End: What Wit Is, How It Works, and Why We Need It. Why we need it even more.
And it's so smart. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's. I mean, you can tell it's a smart book.
And the book on metaphor is called I Is Another: The Secret Life of Metaphor and How It Shapes the Way We See the World. So metaphor, wit, and aphorisms, they're all kind of related, at least in my mind.
Well, it's fantastic, and I'm looking forward for more. And I really appreciate you coming in, and I think it was a fun conversation, and it's great to see you.
You, John. Thanks for the invitation.
All right, we'll wrap it up. Thanks for coming, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.